Imagine being shot in the face, losing an eye, losing a hand, surviving 2 plane crashes, and escaping from a prisoner of war camp. Now, imagine doing all of this across 3 different wars and living to age 83. This is not the plot of an action movie. This is the true story of Lieutenant General Sir Adrian Carton de Wiart, a man who was wounded 11 times, mentioned in dispatches 8 times, and decorated with some of the highest military honors in the British Empire. When asked about his experiences in war, he wrote in his autobiography that, frankly, he had enjoyed it. This is the story of the most unkillable soldier who ever lived. Adrian Paul Ghislain Carton de Wiart was born on May 5, 1880, in Brussels, Belgium. His father was a wealthy Belgian aristocrat and lawyer. His mother died when Adrian was just 6 years old, leaving a void that would shape the boy's fearless approach to life. He was sent to boarding school in England, where he developed a reputation as a fighter. He got into scraps regularly. He showed no fear of pain or consequences. Teachers noted his unusual indifference to punishment. At 18, Adrian enrolled at Balliol College, Oxford, to study law. His father expected him to follow in the family profession, but Adrian had other plans. He found academic life boring and restrictive. He craved action and adventure. In 1899, the Second Boer War erupted in South Africa. British forces were fighting against Boer settlers. Adrian saw his opportunity. Without telling his father, he left Oxford and enlisted in the British Army under a false name. He lied about his age and background to avoid being sent home. Adrian joined Paget's Horse, a cavalry unit headed to South Africa. He was 19 years old and finally alive with purpose. The Boer War was brutal. Boer fighters were skilled marksmen who knew the terrain. They used guerrilla tactics against conventional British forces. Many young soldiers died in their first engagement. Adrian thrived. He rode into battle with enthusiasm that shocked his fellow soldiers. Where others hesitated, he charged forward. During one engagement in 1900, Adrian was shot in the stomach and groin. The bullets tore through his abdomen. He collapsed from his horse, bleeding heavily. Medical orderlies rushed him to a field hospital. The doctors expected him to die. The wounds were severe and infection was common. But Adrian survived. He recovered in a hospital in South Africa, then was sent back to England to complete his healing. Most men would have been grateful to escape with their lives. Adrian was frustrated that he was missing the war. As soon as he could walk properly, Adrian returned to South Africa to rejoin his unit. His father had discovered his deception by then. There were arguments and recriminations, but Adrian was determined. He officially received his commission as a second lieutenant. He fought through the remainder of the Boer War, participating in numerous skirmishes. He proved himself brave to the point of recklessness. His superiors noted his complete disregard for personal safety. The Boer War ended in 1902. Adrian had survived his first war, though barely. He decided to make the military his career. He applied to join the regular British Army and was accepted into the 4th Royal Irish Dragoon Guards. Over the next decade, he served in various posts throughout the British Empire. He was stationed in India and South Africa. He hunted big game in his spare time. He lived for danger and excitement. Peacetime service felt like waiting. In 1914, the world exploded into war. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand triggered a chain reaction that pulled all the major European powers into conflict. World War I began in August. Britain declared war on Germany. Adrian Carton de Wiart, now 34 years old, finally had the war he had been waiting for. He was assigned to the Somaliland Camel Corps in East Africa, fighting against the forces of Mohammed Abdullah Hassan, known as the Mad Mullah. During the campaign in Somaliland, Adrian was shot twice in the face. One bullet destroyed his left eye. The other tore through his ear and skull. He was found lying in the sand, his face a mask of blood. His men thought he was dead, but Adrian was conscious. He refused to be evacuated until the battle was over. When he finally received medical attention, the doctors removed his damaged eye. Adrian recovered and returned to duty wearing an eye patch. He looked like a pirate and fought like a demon. In 1915, Adrian was transferred to the Western Front in Europe. This was where the war was most intense. Millions of men faced each other across trenches that stretched from the English Channel to Switzerland. The fighting was industrial slaughter on a scale never seen before. Machine guns, artillery, poison gas, all deployed to kill as many men as possible. Adrian arrived in France and immediately threw himself into the worst of it. The Western Front was hell on earth. Soldiers lived in muddy trenches infested with rats and lice. They endured constant artillery bombardment. They launched attacks across no man's land into machine gun fire. Life expectancy for junior officers was measured in weeks. Adrian was promoted to lieutenant colonel and given command of the 8th Battalion of the Gloucestershire Regiment. His men called him the man who couldn't be killed. In 1916, during the Battle of the Somme, Adrian was shot through the back of the head. The bullet entered near his skull and exited through his face. Somehow, it missed his brain and major blood vessels. He fell unconscious but survived. He woke up in a field hospital with another wound to add to his collection. The doctors were amazed he was alive. Adrian was annoyed he was missing the battle. He recovered and returned to his battalion within weeks. Later that same year, during fighting near La Boiselle, Adrian was shot in the hip. The bullet shattered bone and lodged deep in his pelvis. He continued fighting for several hours before finally agreeing to be evacuated. Surgeons operated on him in a casualty clearing station. They removed bone fragments, but couldn't safely extract the bullet. Adrian would carry that piece of German metal in his hip for the rest of his life. In 1917, Adrian's left hand was severely damaged by a German grenade during an attack. Several of his fingers were mangled beyond repair. He was taken to a field hospital where a doctor examined the damage. The doctor believed he could save the fingers with careful treatment. Adrian disagreed. He could see the fingers were useless. They hung by threads of tissue and would never function properly. He demanded amputation. The doctor refused, wanting to try conservative treatment first. Adrian solved the problem himself. When the doctor left, he bit off his own damaged fingers. He simply tore them away with his teeth. When the doctor returned and saw what Adrian had done, he was horrified. But Adrian was satisfied. The useless fingers were gone. The doctor had no choice but to clean the wounds and complete the amputation properly. Adrian's hand was fitted with a crude prosthetic. He learned to shoot, ride, and fight with one hand. Throughout 1917 and 1918, Adrian continued commanding his battalion. He was wounded again in the ankle, then the leg, then the ear again. Each time, he recovered and returned to duty. His men developed a superstitious belief that Adrian couldn't die. They felt safer serving under him, as if his invincibility somehow protected them too. Adrian led from the front, always visible in his eye patch and with his missing hand. He inspired fierce loyalty. During the spring offensive of 1918, German forces launched a massive attack, trying to break through Allied lines before American reinforcements could arrive. Adrian's battalion was in the thick of the fighting. For days they held their positions against overwhelming odds. Adrian moved constantly along the trenches, encouraging his men, directing fire and personally engaging German soldiers. He was shot in the leg during this period, but refused evacuation. By the time the war ended in November 1918, Adrian had been wounded 11 times. He had been mentioned in dispatches 8 times for gallantry. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Order and Bar, and the Victoria Cross had been recommended for him, though he ultimately received the Victoria Cross in 1916 for his actions at La Boiselle. He had lost his left eye and his left hand. He walked with a slight limp from his various leg wounds. He was 48 years old and looked like he had been through a meat grinder. When Adrian wrote his memoirs years later, he titled one chapter, "I Enjoyed the War." This was not bravado or dark humor. He genuinely meant it. Adrian felt most alive in combat. The danger, the chaos, the constant nearness of death, these things energized him. Peacetime felt dull and pointless by comparison. He struggled with civilian life. He needed action and purpose. The British Army, recognizing his value and experience, kept him on active duty. In the years between the wars, Adrian served in various military posts. He was stationed in Poland as part of the British military mission from 1919 to 1924. He loved Poland and its people. He hunted extensively in the Polish countryside. He formed friendships with Polish officers and learned the language. He felt useful again, helping rebuild the Polish military after their independence. But he missed combat. He missed the simplicity of war, where problems were solved with courage and bullets. In 1939, The world descended into war again. Nazi Germany invaded Poland on September 1st. Britain and France declared war on Germany 2 days later. World War II had begun. Adrian Carton de Wiart was 59 years old. Most men that age were retired or in comfortable staff positions. Adrian requested a combat command. The British Army, desperate for experienced officers, agreed. Adrian was given command of the Central Norway Expeditionary Force. The Norwegian campaign was a disaster from the start. Germany invaded Norway in April 1940 to secure iron ore supplies and naval bases. Britain and France sent forces to help defend Norway, but the operation was poorly planned and under-resourced. Adrian arrived in Norway with 5,000 British troops. They faced superior German forces with complete air superiority. The Allies had no air cover. German Stuka dive bombers attacked constantly. Adrian did his best with impossible circumstances. His forces fought bravely, but were outmatched. The Germans had seized key ports and airfields. Allied supply lines were chaotic. Norwegian forces were scattered. Adrian moved between different sectors, trying to coordinate a defense. He exposed himself to constant danger, as always. His staff officers worried constantly that their commander would be killed by a random bomb or sniper. After weeks of fighting, the situation became hopeless. Allied forces were evacuated from Norway in May 1940. The campaign had been a failure. Adrian was frustrated, but not discouraged. He had done everything possible with the resources available. The British government needed experienced commanders desperately. France was collapsing under German assault. Adrian was reassigned almost immediately. In 1941, Adrian was sent to Yugoslavia as head of the British military mission. His job was to coordinate with Yugoslav forces and provide support against the Axis powers. He flew to Yugoslavia in April. The country was in chaos. Germany had invaded. The Yugoslav government was fracturing. Adrian met with various military and political leaders trying to organize resistance, but events moved too quickly. On April 11, 1941, Adrian was flying in a British aircraft over the Mediterranean when the plane developed engine trouble. They were over the sea between Libya and Egypt. The pilot struggled to maintain altitude. The engine coughed and died. The plane went down hard into the water. This was Adrian's first plane crash. He was 61 years old, with one eye, one hand, and multiple old wounds. He survived the impact. Adrian and the other survivors clung to wreckage in the water. They were eventually picked up by an Italian naval vessel. Italy was fighting on Germany's side. Adrian and his companions were now prisoners of war. They were taken to Italy and imprisoned. For most men, especially one of Adrian's age and physical condition, this would have been the end of active service. For Adrian, it was merely an inconvenience to be overcome. Adrian was held in an Italian POW camp. The Italians knew they had captured a high-ranking British officer. They treated him with a certain respect, but he was still a prisoner. Adrian immediately began planning his escape. He was over 60 years old, partially disabled, and held in a secured facility. He didn't care. He had never accepted limitations. He certainly wasn't going to start as a prisoner. Adrian studied the camp layout. He observed guard routines. He looked for weaknesses in security. He made contact with other British prisoners. Together, they hatched an escape plan. They would dig a tunnel. It was classic POW stuff, the kind of thing that sounds simple but required months of patient, dangerous work. Adrian threw himself into it with the same intensity he brought to combat. The tunnel was dug slowly, using improvised tools. The prisoners worked in shifts, removing dirt and hiding it around the camp. Adrian, despite his age and injuries, took his turn, digging. He squeezed through tight spaces with his one good hand. The other prisoners were inspired by his determination. If the old general could do it, they had no excuse. The tunnel inched forward day by day. In 1943, after months of work, the tunnel was complete. Adrian and several other prisoners made their escape attempt. They crawled through the tunnel in darkness, emerged outside the camp perimeter, and disappeared into the Italian countryside. They were free. Adrian was 63 years old and on the run behind enemy lines. Most men his age were retired. Adrian was escaping from POW camps and evading enemy patrols. The escape didn't last long. Italy was occupied by German forces and crawling with patrols. Adrian and his companions had no supplies, no local contacts, and no way to reach Allied lines. Within days, they were recaptured. The Italians were furious. Adrian was placed in a more secure facility. His status as a high-ranking officer probably saved him from harsher punishment, but he was locked up tighter this time. Adrian spent the next 2 years as a prisoner. He made at least one more escape attempt, though details are scarce. Each time, he was recaptured. The Italians eventually transferred him to a castle that served as a special camp for important prisoners. Security was intense. Escape was nearly impossible. Adrian settled in to wait, but he never stopped looking for opportunities. In August 1943, Italy switched sides in the war. The Italian government surrendered to the Allies and joined them against Germany. This created chaos throughout Italian-held territories. German forces moved quickly to occupy Italy and secure important locations, including POW camps. Adrian's camp was in the confusion zone. For a brief period, neither Italian nor German forces fully controlled the area. Adrian saw his chance. During the chaos of the Italian surrender, security at the camp weakened. Guards were confused about their orders. Some left their posts. Adrian and several other prisoners simply walked out. This time, they had better luck. They made contact with Italian partisans who were now fighting against the Germans. The partisans helped them reach Allied lines. Adrian was finally free. He was repatriated to Britain in late 1943. He had spent over 2 years as a prisoner of war. Most officers his age would have been retired immediately, given a medal, and sent home. The British military offered Adrian exactly that. He refused. He wanted to return to active duty. He was 63 years old, had one eye, one hand, and a body full of shrapnel and scars. He demanded a new assignment. Winston Churchill personally intervened. Churchill appreciated Adrian's spirit and experience. He gave Adrian a new mission. Adrian was sent to China as the personal representative of Churchill to Chiang Kai-shek, the Chinese nationalist leader. China was fighting against Japanese invasion. Britain needed to maintain strong relations with China. Adrian was the perfect choice. Tough, experienced, and utterly reliable. Adrian arrived in China in 1944. He established himself in Chongqing, the wartime capital. He met regularly with Chiang Kai-shek and other Chinese leaders. His job was diplomatic, not military combat, but Adrian approached it with the same intensity he brought to everything. He traveled extensively through China, often to areas near the fighting. He ignored danger. At 64, he was still putting himself in harm's way. The war in Asia was different from anything Adrian had experienced. The Japanese were ruthless fighters. The Chinese armies were poorly equipped but determined. The terrain was difficult, ranging from mountains to jungle to rivers. Adrian observed everything with a military eye. He sent detailed reports back to London about Chinese capabilities, Japanese tactics, and the overall strategic situation. In 1945, World War II finally ended. Germany surrendered in May. Japan surrendered in August after atomic bombs destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Adrian was 65 years old. He had served in 3 wars, spanning nearly half a century. He had been wounded 11 times. He had survived 2 plane crashes, escaped from a POW camp, and served on 4 continents. Surely now he would retire. Adrian did retire from active military service in 1947, 2 years after the war ended. He was 67 years old. The British government honored him with numerous decorations and promotions. He was knighted and held the rank of lieutenant general, but retirement didn't mean inactivity. Adrian was incapable of sitting still. He needed challenges and adventures. He moved to a small village in County Cork, Ireland. He bought a modest estate and settled into what others might call a quiet life. But Adrian's version of quiet was still more active than most people's hectic. He fished extensively in Irish waters. He hunted. He maintained a large garden. He wrote his memoirs titled Happy Odyssey, which chronicled his military adventures with characteristic understatement and humor. Adrian never complained about his wounds or disabilities. He adapted to life with one eye and one hand, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He remained physically active into his 70s. He walked miles every day. He swam in cold Irish waters. He maintained the physical discipline he had developed over decades of military service. His body was scarred and damaged, but his spirit was unbreakable. Friends and visitors noted his cheerful demeanor. Adrian was not haunted by his experiences. He had no nightmares or trauma that he ever discussed. He genuinely had enjoyed the wars. He felt he had lived a full, exciting life. He had served his country with distinction. He had survived everything the world threw at him. He regretted nothing. When asked about losing his eye and hand, he would shrug and say he didn't miss them. He had everything he needed. Adrian Carton de Wiart lived for another 16 years after retiring. He spent them in Ireland, enjoying the countryside and the company of friends. He maintained correspondence with former military colleagues and subordinates. Many visited him over the years, wanting to pay respects to the legendary officer. Adrian received them graciously, telling stories and offering wisdom earned through decades of combat. He never spoke bitterly about the horrors of war. He acknowledged the death and destruction, but he didn't dwell on them. For Adrian, war had been his purpose. It had given his life meaning and direction. He had been good at it. He had saved lives through his leadership and courage. He had served honorably. That was enough for him. The physical cost had been high, but he considered it a fair price. Adrian died on June 5th, 1963, at the age of 83. He died peacefully in his sleep at his home in Ireland. He had survived wounds that should have killed him multiple times. He had outlived most of his contemporaries. He had cheated death so many times that when death finally claimed him, it was through simple old age. It seemed almost anticlimactic for a man who had lived so dramatically. His funeral was attended by military officers from several nations. Polish veterans came to honor the man who had served their country between the wars. British officers saluted their legendary commander. Ordinary soldiers who had served under him came to say goodbye. They all remembered the one-eyed, one-handed general who had led from the front and never asked his men to do anything he wouldn't do himself. Adrian's legacy extends beyond his personal survival story. He represented a particular type of warrior that is rarely seen. He genuinely loved combat, not for cruelty or bloodlust, but because it demanded everything from him. It tested him completely. It gave him purpose and meaning. In an age of mechanized warfare and industrial slaughter, Adrian remained an individual warrior, facing danger with courage and even joy. His autobiography, published in 1950, gives insight into his mindset. He wrote with humor and humility about his adventures. He downplayed his own courage while praising the men he served with. He described horrific wounds and near-death experiences with the same tone someone else might use to describe a fishing trip. His writing reveals a man completely comfortable with who he was and the choices he made. Modern military historians study Adrian as an example of leadership under extreme conditions. He never asked for safe assignments. He never used his rank to avoid danger. He shared every hardship with his men. This created absolute loyalty among his troops. They would follow him anywhere because they knew he would never abandon them. His physical courage was obvious, but his moral courage was equally important. The question often asked is why Adrian was so fearless. Some speculate about his mother's early death creating a void or psychological damage. Others point to a possible neurological difference that prevented normal fear responses. Adrian himself offered no deep explanations. He simply said he found war exciting and purposeful. He felt alive in combat. Perhaps some people are simply wired differently, finding peace in chaos and meaning in danger. What cannot be disputed is the statistical improbability of his survival, being wounded 11 times across 3 wars, surviving 2 plane crashes, escaping from POW camps in his 60s, all while missing an eye and a hand. These things should not be possible. The odds against surviving even half of what Adrian endured are astronomical. Yet he not only survived, he thrived. He lived to 83, dying of natural causes in his bed. Adrian Carton de Wiart remains one of the most remarkable military figures of the 20th century. His story sounds like fiction, but every detail is documented. He earned his decorations through actions witnessed by dozens or hundreds of men. His wounds were treated by military doctors who recorded them in medical files. His escapes and adventures were reported in official documents. The unkillable soldier was real. His life poses uncomfortable questions about war and human nature. Can someone genuinely enjoy war without being a monster? Adrian was not cruel or sadistic. He was brave and honorable, but he found fulfillment in combat that he never found in peace. This challenges our assumptions about war being universally traumatic and horrible. For Adrian, war was where he belonged. He was one of history's true warriors, a man born for battle, who found his purpose in the chaos of combat and emerged against all odds victorious over death itself.